Chapter 9 Bound by Loyalty. Before we continue with Kimari's story, let's get some background on him. Kimari is a Ronso. The Ronso are a strong and proud people who live in the harsh environment of Mount Gagazet. All young male Ronso dream of becoming strong like the mountain itself, in order to one day become a great warrior for their tribe. However, Kimari was always the smallest of the tribe, even smaller than some female Ronso. This made him the target of constant ridicule. Within the Ronso tribe was a Ronso called Biran. He was said to be the strongest of the Ronso as he was the biggest of the young Ronso in his age group. Because of this, the Ronso looked upon him as someone who would become the bravest Ronso warrior one day. Kimari and Biran would often get into fights, and despite the fact that Kimari could never beat him, he never accepted defeat. This angered Biran, and eventually Biran broke off Kimari's horn, bringing dishonor upon him. Because
I can't tell what you're saying, but I hear you talking. At least I know like you're not talking to yourself out here. Also, look at this sexiness. Ooh. Ooh. Yeah. Ooh. No.
I think I'm going to keep this in the recording.
Oh no! This has been your interruption of the waifu.
Because of this dishonor, Kimari could no longer bear the responsibility of guarding Mount Gagazet, so he fled the mountain and went to Bevel. This is around the time that he met Oren. Back to the present, a 7-year-old Yuna splits herself off from the crowd celebrating the defeat of Sin as it starts to dawn on her that her father was dead. She goes over to a bridge where she could see the calm lands, the fields where her father had fought Sin, the bridge where she last saw her father. There, Kimari approaches her and tells her that he is looking for the daughter of Braska. Scared at first because, well, she's a 7-year-old girl facing a giant catman looking for her. Eventually, however, Yuna told him that she was Braska's daughter, and Kimari, not being used to talking to children, straight up told her that he was there to take her far from Bevel to honor the wish of a dying man. Meaning Oren, but she probably thought that she meant her dad, and thus began crying as all hope she may have had of her father being alive melted, and she finally accepted that her father was dead. Yuna cried in Kimari's arms, and he just held her quietly. Kimari eventually led her to Besaid Island village, under the care of the Temple of Yevon. However, as he tried to leave, Yuna grabbed onto his arm and begged him not to go, and Kimari listened. He actually stayed with her. Not just for a little while, but he stuck with her for years as she grew up. Guarding her and keeping her safe gave new meaning to Kimari's life. With the arrival of Braska's calm, tensions in Guadalsalam had subsided, and Jisco revoked Seymour's exile, a decade after he enacted it. A now 18-year-old Seymour, who grew up by himself after being exiled by his father, and after watching his mother sacrifice herself for him, now helps his father in Guadalsalam as a priest of Yevon. I'm sure this can't go wrong in any way. Bound to the world of the living by his loyalty, Oren did not make it to the far plane. Instead, Oren remained in Spira as an unsent in order to fulfill the promise he made to Braska and Jet. To do so, he waited for Sin to re-emerge, which it did only 1 year later. However, with Jet at its core, and this version of Sin still being young, Oren could still somewhat communicate with Jet, and so, being an unsent, he was able to ride on Sin and make his way to Dream Xanarkand, where he looked over and mentored Titus. Titus, despite Oren trying to convince him otherwise, had grown to hate his father even more after he disappeared. You see, when Jet was with him, he hated him because he would always push him to become better in his own way, which was more like he was always verbally abusing him by putting him down all the time. However, ever since he disappeared, Titus' mom became obsessed with finding Jet, so much so that she became neglectful of Titus, the one parent that he thought he could rely on, and his mother then became noticeably depressed. The same year that Oren arrived in Dream Xanarkand, Titus' mother died of a quote-unquote broken heart. Back in Spira, as part of Grand Maester Micah's sub-races appeasement policy, sub-races being any race other than human, Jiskel, leader of the Guado, and Kelk, leader of the Ronso, became Maesters of Yevon. 6 years later, Wen Keenock, Orin's old warrior monk friend, became a fourth Maester of Yevon, and thus becoming the leader of the warrior monks along with the commander of the Crusaders. That same year, Seymour became the high priest of the Makalanya Temple of Yevon. Using his connections as high priest, Seymour secretly traveled to the Zanarkand ruins and had the statue of his anima Faith, his mother's Aeon, transported to the Baj Temple. He would frequently visit the temple where he would contemplate and slowly formulate his grand plan. Chapter 10: The Besaid Duo. We are now only 2 years before the events of Final Fantasy X. At this point, the little girl Yuna is now a 15-year-old apprentice summoner, and Kimahri has become her first guardian. But let's back up a little to go over some characters I couldn't really cover without breaking the flow of the story. And by a little, I mean 21 years ago. 21 years ago, a boy named Wakka was born in the Beast and Besaid village. The same year, the Besaid Oryx, the Blitzball team of Besaid Village, lost the first round of the Blitzball tournament, which would start a 23-year streak of losses. A year later, a girl named Lulu was born in the same village. At some point within the next couple of years, Wakka's younger brother, Chapu, was born. I'm surprised by how there is no precise birth date for him, considering how often he's brought up later in the game, and how other less important characters have ages assigned to them. And it was at some point between Chapu's birth and Wakka's 5th birthday, his parents died, leaving Wakka to take care of his baby brother. However, since these kind of tragedies were commonplace in Spira, the village people were ready and able to help and raise them. Thus, Wakka and Chapu came to be raised by not only the village, but the temple in the village. In order to get Sin out of his mind, when Wakka was 5 years old, the same year that Braska eloped with Yuna's mom, he began playing Blitzball, and he fixated on it. At the same time, Wakka came to see the people's and the temple's kindness, after his parents' death, as a blessing from Yevon, and thus he started to revere Yevon's teachings. He began to strongly believe that if the people followed the teachings of Yevon, they could atone for their sins. Maybe in his mind, this was his own way of fighting sin. A year later, the year Yuna and Tidus were born, Lulu's parents died in an attack by Sin when she was only 5 years old. And I hate to just fly by that, but that's all the information we got about it. They just died. 7 years later, when Wakka was 13, he joined the Besaid Oryx. Later that year, when Kimahri brought Yuna to Besaid, he and Lulu became close to Yuna, and they both came to treat her like a little sister. Eventually, Chapu would follow in Wakka's footsteps and join the Besaid Oryx. Is it Oryx or Oryx? To play with his older brother. At this point, Blitzball was Wakka's life. 8 years later, when Lulu was 20 and Yuna was 15, as I mentioned before, Yuna decided to become an apprentice summoner, a choice which Wakka and Lulu both disapproved of, knowing the implications. However, Yuna, being a strong-willed young woman, refused to change her mind as she wanted to follow in her father's footsteps, and she had a genuine love for the people of Spira. Knowing she couldn't change her mind and respecting her decision, Lulu decided to protect Yuna the only other way she could, by helping another summoner defeat Sin. That same year, Lulu became the sole guardian of the summoner Lady Ginham. Unfortunately, the pilgrimage came to an end in a cave near the Calmlands, where they were attempting to get a stolen Aeon, Jojimbo. There, being an inexperienced guardian, Lulu failed to protect Lady Ginham from a fiend, and she was struck down. Lulu survived and returned to Besaid, but this left her with guilt that she would live with for years. A year later, Lulu became the guardian of another summoner, Zook. Wakka agreed to join them as well this time, but only after the Blitzball tournament. By this time, Lulu and Chapu had fallen for each other and were in a relationship. In fact, he would always tell Waka how the day that the Besaid Oryx won the tournament, he would propose to Lulu. Which, given the Besaid Oryx track record, maybe that was his sassy way of saying that he would never propose to her. I mean, why would he make that the deadline? Whatever. Anyways, one day Luzu, one of the Crusaders who lived in Besaid, tried recruiting Chapu to the Crusaders. Driven by his desire to protect Lulu from Sin, Chapu joined the Crusaders, who were about to enlist in a mission to fight Sin. Both Waka and Lulu disapproved, but knowing they couldn't change his mind, Waka gave him a sword called Brotherhood to fight with. But Chapu preferred fighting with an Albert Machina weapon, something which angered Waka, as he had at this point become a strong follower of Yevon's teachings. As Waka made his trip to the Luka Blitzball Stadium, Chapu would make his way to Jose to fight Sin. However, of course, the battle didn't go their way, and not only did the Crusaders lose, but Chapu's body was left crushed on the Jose beach. Waka received the news during the Blitzball tournament, and whoever made the decision that this was a good time to tell him was an asshole. Predictably, these news threw off Waka's concentration, and despite Waka knowing that this was a game that was within their grasp, the Besaid Oryx lost. Waka already disliked Machina because of his deep faith in Yevon's teachings, but now he outright hated the Albed and their Machina, as he blamed Chapu's death on him using an Albed weapon instead of the sword he gave him. After this, Lulu and Waka, now filled with even more determination, became Zook's guardian and began his pilgrimage to Zanarkand. However, this pilgrimage was cut short as well. Not because Zook died, but 6 months later, when they reached the Calmlands, Father Zook just gave up. And thus, everyone returned to Besaid Island. Father Zook eventually became a priest of Yevon and Bevel. Knowing that Yuna's pilgrimage would start soon, and that there was no stopping her anymore, Lulu gave up on her quest to help other summoners defeat Sin, and instead, she and Waka became the second and third of Yuna's guardians. If she couldn't save her from Sin, she could at least make sure that she dies on her own terms, fulfilling her mission to Spira. 6 months later, Chisco Guado, the leader of the Guado, died mysteriously, and his son, Seymour, became the leader of the Guado and the Maester of Yevon.